Hey everybody, Kelly Justice here with Philosophy Society. It is July 3rd. It's a Wednesday. We are in room 860 today. So we had just a quick review of this week. So we had some discussion about time. And I'm not going to do that presentation on time today because I want to do a better, robust. So I haven't really read that material, so it's actually all new arguments for me.
Okay.
But I read through the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy article on it. It's written by 3 people with PhDs, and there's 12 sections spanning fatalism, and then there's like a type A and type B conceptualization of time. One is like ambiguous, like past, present, and future, and then the other one is relative, like at this specific time or before this specific time. And so the problem with type A of past, present, and future is that it always changes. Right, so it seems that there is no such thing as time because there always is a present, but the present then becomes the past. And I say that sometimes actually when I'm doing the YouTube thing. I say we have people in the room, people online, and then people in the future on YouTube, which will be their present. Right, so that's one of the arguments in the philosophy of time, of the nature of time itself. So I'd like to go through those arguments. It's nice. It's a good overview. I'd like to go through them a bit meticulously. We could just read through the article together, but I think it's better to have a PowerPoint presentation, and then we can look at each section. But there might be 3 to 5 slides per section, so that's a lot to do it well, because you have to go through the argument and then understand it, spend a little time thinking about it. But that's not a bad thing to have on the YouTube channel. I think people will enjoy that. They can refer back to it, so there's value there. So instead of doing a crappy job quickly, I'm just going to go through the 7 habits today. We're going to continue from at the center, which in this edition is on page 123. And we have the diagram of security, or sorry, the center of your principles or your values or whatever. And then you have wisdom, guidance, security, and power. And so these are 4 life support properties, he says, that allow you to kind of like, I don't know, do things relative to your goals. So when you have your goal, begin with the end in mind, these are the things that help you get there, right? They're the faculties in some ways, or the mode of faculty. It's like the way that you do it. And so different centers, different orientations of value will affect those properties in you achieving your goals. Right. And so that's where he goes, like with people that are like pleasure centered or people that are like money centered or work centered, how that affects their faculties of wisdom, guidance, security, and power. And so we're just going to start from there, which is a good place to start. It's good to think about that a couple of times, you know. And
one question. You talked about eternal. When you say eternal, is a religious concept. I mean, reincarnation or paradise. I mean, we have the flesh and we have soul. So eternal is, or eternal, what do you think is eternal?
What context did I use that word in?
Eternal.
Did I say that?
In a non-religious context.
You're just asking in general.
Because for me, okay, I can think in one paradise. If you are good, you go to the paradise. It's very simple. If you are not good, you go to the hell.
Yeah.
It's same for Muslim. It's same for somehow Jews. But what about if you don't believe in our reincarnation? If you don't believe, what is eternal for you? You mentioned.
Well, eternal, I think, is forever. I used the word eternal. Did I say that? I don't remember. What context did I say it in? In this context or the time context?
The time.
Oh yeah. Well,
you mentioned
yeah. Like it's timeless. So eternal could mean like going on forever, or it could mean outside of the bounds of time.
Okay.
Right? Those are 2 different things. So time we see as directional. It goes in a specific direction. It's not like a prong where there are like, you can shift to a different time. And part of it is that we don't want to confuse time and space. Right? So people will even using an arrow is a dimensional, like a 3-dimensional kind of mode or 1-dimensional mode of understanding, but that's technically incorrect because that's a spatial conception.
Do you know Einstein, the theory, relativity theory? the relationships between time and space.
Yeah, well,
It's not absolute.
it's relative. Yeah.
It's relative.
So for example, if you like are in an area with different gravity, time will slow down or speed up, right?
Yes.
And space-time is one thing actually. And so we can understand time as the change of space
Yes.
in a cosmos that has entropy, right? Like there may be static, like there are certain fundamental properties of the universe, like the speed of light and like other properties. I'm not a physicist, so, but like, they're properties. And if those properties change ever so slightly, then what occurs is you wouldn't have a cosmos with matter, and then time is just that matter through duration. Like it's not momentary. Again, see, I'm being circular because I'm using time words to understand it. So it's important, just like space-time is, yeah, that's why we're going to go through the presentation. I want to do a better job of going through it meticulously. It's not working?
Again.
You give up. David, do you think you can help her? Do you think we can figure this out? And we're gonna summon David's wisdom here. Let's see if David can help.
Just
Step one, plug it in.
I guess you already tried, right?
She's like, I know that,
Did.
Achilles.
Did. There's another cable, and I tried this.
Mhm.
It still says there's no signal.
Okay, so yeah, well, you guys do that. So we'll go through the space or the time presentation later. So for now, I'm going to present the screen.
HDMI.
No, you have to do that. It's this. I'll show you.
Okay, so we're on page 123 in this edition of the book. So I'm just going to read through the slide first, and then I'll go to the book and read through the book. So begin at your utmost center when writing a mission statement using self-awareness. Examine for correct principled maps, making sure they describe the territory or reality. And so we can apply our critical thinking here and our principles of the philosophy of science. Working at the center of our influence, we expand it. So that's about the notion of being proactive. So there's 4 life support factors. So these are almost like faculties of the mind or faculties of being, you could say. So security, guidance, wisdom, and power. Security is like your self-esteem, your sense of worth, and your identity. And so that's necessary to establish goals that are meaningful to you, right? Guidance is your direction in life, what the goal is in general, your values, your frame of reference, and decision-making in the moment. So that's important for character. Wisdom is your perspective, your attitudes, sense of balance, understanding as an integrated wholeness. So again, that making sense of things. And then the sense of balance, I would say that's more of a lifestyle property of wisdom here, right? Because when we talk about philosophy in an academic context, when we're bringing up these other philosophers and trying to discriminate pseudoscience from science, that's very analytical, right? That's different than a sense of balance, being wise in your lifestyle or your mental health. And then power, the faculty or capacity to act, overcome deeply embedded habits. So he talks about that rescripting and being proactive in contrast to what your genetics are, how you were brought up, and what your current habits are. And cultivate higher, more effective ones. So better habits. An interdependent factor that creates a balanced character. And none of these are all or nothing. They're all intertwined with each other, right? And these 4 factors are going to be influenced by whatever your center is, the thing that you revolve around, like the most core part of your life or your values, right? And so he ultimately argues that being principle-centered is the best way to go.
Okay.
And so just reading from the book. So again, we have this image. So he has like the center and the 4 life support factors grow out of this center, right? In order to write a personal mission statement, begin at the very center of our circle of influence. That center, you can just put the chair there if you like. Our most basic paradigms, the lens through which we see the world. Here, that we deal with our vision and our values. Use our endowment of self-awareness to examine our maps, if we value correct principles to make certain that our maps accurately describe the territory. Our paradigms are based on principles and reality. So when he's saying that, like, if you have problems with sleeping and you're talking about like energies or chakras or, you know, things that are not relevant to the problem that you're dealing with. So we have to make sense of things, right? And that's where being philosophical is important. The way I'm looking at it is going to help. Like people with addictions, they're engaged in negative habits to deal with their stress, but they're not healthy stress relieving mechanisms.
Okay.
Right? So the paradigm or the way of being is inaccurate to reality. And that's why it's like a disorder, like substance use disorder. DNA.
Yes.
So you would have, like, we all have the genetics,
Mhm.
right, to give us these capacities.
Okay.
But there's no gene for wisdom per se. Like maybe a certain part of the brain, you know, but it would be multiple genes all together that give the blueprint to have that brain to do that. But then there's also environmental factors, right? Like you have to live a certain kind of life to develop wisdom.
Okay.
You know what I mean? And the example of that is like feral children,
Mhm.
like kids that are kept in isolation throughout their lives. They don't comprehend language in a sophisticated manner. So their wisdom would be depreciated,
Okay.
right? You could say that you could do it with some, like you'd be lacking the integrated, going with his properties. Your perspective would be skewed. You may have a sense of balance if you had good habits. Someone would have to teach you that though, right? And you'd still be subject to going out of balance because you can't understand or comprehend what it means to be human. You know what I mean? So
So,
Yeah.
a question is, I mean, this is all great.
Mhm.
But in the real life, the experience says, even though I know, you know, theoretically, you know, what I should do, you know, I should follow my wisdom, I should come up with this power. But in reality, many times there's I don't know, subconsciously or whatever, you just become lazy, or you just become like, oh, you're just not that aware.
okay,
You know,
sure.
because you know, maybe at a moment, oh, I should do this, you know, like I should go to gym, you know, I should go to you know, I should spend time working, but oh, I'm so sleepy, oh, it's so hot, you know. And then, you know, so I guess my question is, this is great, but how come we couldn't do it?
Yeah. Well, that's the habit part, right? And so in the next chapter, he talks about how to manage our time. So when you identify a specific goal, like exercising, then what you have to do is put it in your weekly schedule.
Mhm.
And I'm not the best at that part either. Like this, I'm learning from this book right now too.
Yeah, me
Like
too.
I really am. And I'm like, I've read it several times. I've taught it a couple times, but I forget it, you know, and I just get into like a pattern that's not really good. And like some of my concerns is like, sometimes I need to take time for myself because I don't feel good. And I need to do things that calm me down and my brain processes stuff. And then I'm like, okay, now I've dealt with all that stuff and I can take on more, right? Because I very often overwhelm myself, whatever. It's bad. It's not a good thing, but whatever. So if I have a schedule, I'm like, I need to do all these things. It can be contrary to my current state, right? And so that's one of my problems with this. And maybe it's a lack of understanding with it, or it could be a deficiency in it. I'm not sure which way to go with it. Yeah.
But you know, but I don't know if you know that biology or you know whatever the research, the study shows that there's some dopamine or I don't know. Let me give you an example. Like last night, normally during the evening I was getting tired. If I was still want to read some philosophy book, I eat ice cream.
Okay.
Because the ice cream, I don't know, it produced something, you know, sugar, you know, and then I have energy, you know.
Yeah.
Then I could read, you know, but of course, you know, it's not that healthy, you know. I eat half box of that ice. I cannot do that every night, right? So I'm just telling you, you know,
Yeah.
I guess, you know, I mean, even though how strongly I say, oh, I should read some books, you know, even though I know this, I should do it, but without the ice cream definitely provide the sugar or the what do you call it, dopamine. There's some chemical stuff, you know, in my body.
We have an insulin spike when you have a lot of sugar, right?
Yeah, something like that. That's why
and it gives you
we have
glucose.
this, have this.
Yeah. Well, this has no sugar in it. It's just the caffeine, which is another drug. You know?
Same thing.
Well, the caffeine is different than sugar, technically.
Right. I know. But you need something. You cannot just rely on the principle here just to.
So one of the other courses, this is one course. So we had so Natalia's this is course 2 for her. So we had feeling good. 'Cause the first thing I wanted to teach the people was how to not be depressed and how to manage our emotions. At least understand that it's possible, right?
Mhm.
And the second thing was this, how to manage our lives. And one of the courses that we can do is Kelly McGonigal. She has a PhD from Stanford or Harvard, and she's a psychologist. And she has a book called The Willpower Instinct.
Mhm.
And it's what are the limitations of willpower and how to exercise our willpower so that we can do habits that are good for us, right? So that would be, we could do that course next, or we could do the critical thinking one, like whatever. So we're gonna do critical thinking. So, okay, let's keep on going.
Yeah, sure.
I think part of it is that you need to keep in mind what the goal is. Where do you want to be? And when you have your present self, you can summon enough, I don't know, motivation to still do that other thing. Even though in the moment it's straining you, it's almost like a character exercise, you know?
A character exercise.
Because it's straining. It's not easy, so it's exercise.
Yeah, definitely.
If it's easy, then you're just kind of doing what your
Yeah.
routine that already
Yeah.
exists.
Yeah.
And
I find it helps if I do that character exercise with the person, with the people.
yeah, that's why that's the exactly.
Yeah.
That's the philosophy.
Yeah,
behind
yeah,
it. The
yeah.
point is that if we like what I'm trying, that's what I'm trying to do,
Yeah.
is have a social group where we can have norms of becoming our best selves, whatever that is. And some people don't give a shit. Like there's one person that came here was like, well, I don't care about being my best self. I don't, you know, it's like, well, this isn't for you then. Right? Okay. You know? But I feel that is the nature of growth. I think it's a fundamental property of the kind of organism that we are in the cosmos. And so you might as well, like if you're in a vehicle that's going in a direction and there is a steering wheel in front of you, you might as well steer it, because you can start to navigate your well-being. And that's really what mental health is learning to navigate your well-being and learning how to not be depressed. Like today in the house, I have like this community housing thing. One of the guys is like, as soon as I woke up, just wanted to spend time with me, right? Because that person was upset. And so they're asking me a bunch of questions about how to feel better. And they're like, you know, more than 90% of the time you have strength. He was talking about me. He's like, you're always okay. Almost, you know? And I'm human too. Like I have moments where I've gotten upset or, you know, I feel sad. And I've learned to allow myself to experience the sadness. But at the same time, I will do psychedelics intermittently because of the effect that they have on our mental health. Like mushrooms or sometimes LSD or sometimes MDMA. And those drugs are in the process of becoming legalized and decriminalized. Like there's a lot of push from psychologists because of their therapeutic and clinical benefits. On the website, I have a chapter written on drugs, part of a chapter, and there's the mental health benefits of some of those drugs there. And so you have to learn. That's why I can't be a cop, because I wouldn't want to be a dishonest cop. I would make a good cop, but I just don't want to like be dishonest. So I'll just be the shaman instead. You know, whatever. That's what we're gonna do. And yeah, like I think that it's important that we look at what's available. We do a risk evaluation. Like other drugs like cocaine or amphetamines or opiates, you know, that's not good. Those are there's a lot of risk with those. Even ketamine shows to help with things like depression, but it's highly addictive and you can overdose on it, right? And so, you know, yeah, like I think that if society was at a more advanced point, you would have a very close relationship with a doctor, right? A medical doctor that can monitor you, not necessarily a psychiatrist, but just someone who understands the biology of the body and these drugs so that they can help you get through it and make sure that people are safe. Because the benefits are great, you know, if you can have the benefits without the risk.
I think a little bit is a society, because in somehow this society is creating weak people.
Okay.
Weak people is you have you can look up, you have food, you have water, you have your job, there's money, you have a friend, and you have one depression.
Yeah.
You say, why? No, I have no idea. This is people around you. So this is weak people in Ukraine now. They have the only is worry about their life.
Mhm.
What is happening tomorrow? I don't know. Is a bomb from Russia? I'm going to die. I have nothing idea about the food.
Mhm.
So this is real problems. But in these Occidental societies, we are creating weak people.
Yeah, we can talk about that. I
Mm.
think that's the point of having a social group or organization that doesn't appeal to faith. It appeals to sound philosophical principles,
Mhm.
right? Or paradigms, using his terminology. And then we look at the science of well-being, right? And if we know that these things are going to make you healthy because a bunch of people have tested it, then let's do those things, right? And I just want to be honest. I don't want to make it seem magical that I'm just like perfect. Like I do psychedelics, you know what I mean? And I think it's important for me to be honest about that,
Mhm.
because I wouldn't want to guide somebody into doing, and they are legal. I get that too, but I wouldn't want to guide somebody to something, but misrepresent how I got there. And I smoked marijuana for a long period of time, to the point where it became unhealthy and it was addictive at a certain point. But in the time that I was doing that, it allowed me to perceive things a little bit differently, and I grew from it. But then I had to step away,
Uh-huh.
right? Because it wasn't functioning in a good way for me anymore, right?
What cannabis is legal here in Canada?
What is it like?
It's cannabis. What is it legal?
Oh, why is it legal?
No, legal, legal, no illegal, legal.
Yeah, why is it legal?
Why? Yes, that's the thing. Alcohol, cannabis, it's many things, soft drugs to be happy.
Oh, why do people consume it?
Sure.
Yeah, well, I think that, like, honestly, man, like, I feel that the way our society is structured because of capitalism, I think capitalism is almost a necessary advancement for the development of a society. We kind of need to go through this right to private property and then an economy. But then if that becomes the focus of our value structure, we get into a whole bunch of other issues. And the United States is currently dealing with some major issues that, you know, a charismatic billionaire can become the leader of a country that is not qualified to lead a social group of people at that level, right?
Uh-huh.
And so, you know, the next stage would be like going beyond just the economy. Like once the economy becomes stable and there's a medium of exchange and the use of resources and an understanding of private property, then what's left over, you know? And maybe once AI and robots are all over the place and they do the majority of the work and we can extract resources, then humans can kind of shift over from this like post-slavery, you know, economy working a 9-to-5 kind of situation, right?
You talking
So,
about the recent debates?
you know, I'm not even going into that specifically. I'm just saying, like, if Donald Trump isn't the worst is yet to come. For whatever reason. And you could like Donald Trump, but when he starts to overthrow democracy with the insurrection, that's where it's like, no, you've gone too far now, you know? Okay, we're way off track. Okay, so let's just get back into this. Okay, so use our endowments of conscience as a compass so he has there's two different things here. There's the endowments, self-awareness, consciousness, conscience, sorry, independent will, and there's one more. Anyways, and then we have these 4 factors: security, guidance, wisdom, power. It's in a previous chapter, right? And so they're two different things. How I think it's important to clearly identify when he says endowment, I almost feel that he means endowed by God. So endowment, I don't like that word personally. I would rather use like instinct,
Okay.
you know, or capacity. I think we can switch that out, and then we can remove ourselves from, because it becomes a fallacy of begging the question, right? If you're just making an assumption that we've been endowed with something. So who does the endowing? And then we have to deal with that argument. But if you just say it's a capacity via evolution, then you don't have to worry about it, right? You're not going to have an unproven premise there. So use our endowments of imagination to mentally create the end we desire, giving direction and purpose to our beginnings, and providing the substance of a written personal constitution. So he's saying be explicit about it and write it down. So next page, 124. Our focused efforts to achieve the greatest results. We also work within the very center of our circle of influence as we expand it. The high level of production capability work. So again, when you increase your capacity to produce, that's really important. And these 4 factors are the things that give you the capacity for production personally, in your relationships with other people, and as an organization. That's the three things he
Like
kind of looks
the
at.
PC things.
There's production capability. So there's the story of the goose and the golden egg. The farmer wants all of the product and kills the goose. He kills the thing that produces the thing, right? So instead, he should have just nurtured the goose, which increases the production capability.
I think the animal protectionists like that.
They would like that, yes. They would also say you have no right to take the goose's eggs.
That's right.
Significantly impacting the effectiveness of every aspect of our lives. Whatever is at the center of our life will be the source of our security, guidance, wisdom, and power. So that's a big quote here, right? And so now he's going to define these things. Page 124. Security represents your sense of worth, your identity, your emotional anchorage, your self-esteem, your basic personal strength or lack of it. Guidance means your source of direction in life, encompassed by your map, internal frame of reference that interprets for you what is happening out there, the standards or principles or implicit criteria that govern moment-to-moment decision-making and doing. So wisdom and guidance are almost the same, but wisdom is your perspective on life. I guess, yeah, guidance is direction, but yeah, like, I guess, yeah, wisdom would be your orientation and guidance would be the value. It's the thing you're going towards. You ought to go towards this thing. I'm guided towards that. But my perspective, I may not even see what's important if I'm not looking at it from the right angle. So if I'm lying on the ground under the table and there's $100 on top of the table, right, I can't see it because of my current perspective.
Do you think, as Daniel Goleman said, this is amygdala wisdom? It's a reptilian. We are animals. So we have a wisdom. So we have power. We have security as animals. For example, I want to kill you. You try to defend. You have it. This is our amygdala, and the other one is the cortex and neocortex. The cortex is wisdom and guidance. You have as in our as human being. Is you can where is the origin of all of these feelings or?
Well, all those organelles in the brain, they all, like, I would say that the security is more about the amygdala because it's emotional.
Yes.
And then the guidance and the
Security
wisdom
and
is a
power.
prefrontal cortex.
And this cortex, neocortex, yes. It's cool.
And then power would be more motivational, right? So he says, so wisdom is your perspective on life, a sense of balance, your understanding of how the various parts and principles apply to and relate to each other. It embraces judgment, discernment, and comprehension, a gestalt or oneness, and integrated wholeness. So that's very accurate to how we would want to think about wisdom. Power is the faculty or capacity to act, the strength and potency to accomplish something. Vital energy to make choices and decisions, includes the capacity to overcome deeply embedded habits and to cultivate higher, more effective ones. These four factors, security, guidance, wisdom, and power, are interdependent. Security and clear guidance bring true wisdom, and wisdom becomes a spark or catalyst to release and direct power. When these four factors are present together, harmonized and enlightened by each other, they create a great force of noble personality, balanced character, and beautifully integrated individual. Life support factors undergird every other dimension of life. None of them is an all or nothing matter. The degree to which you have developed each one could be charted somewhere on a continuum. Like the maturity continuum that you did discuss earlier. At the one side, at the bottom end, the four factors are weak. You're dependent on the circumstances or other people, things over which you have no direct control. At the top end, you're in control, independent strength, the foundation for rich interdependent relationships. Security lies somewhere in the continuum between extreme insecurity on one end, wherein your life is buffed by all the fickle forces that play upon it, and a deep sense of high intrinsic worth and personal security on the other end. Page 125, guidance ranges on the continuum from dependence on the social mirror or other unstable fluctuating sources to strong inner direction. Wisdom falls somewhere between a totally inaccurate map where everything is distorted and nothing seems to fit, and a complete and accurate map of life where all the parts and principles are properly related to each other. Your power lies somewhere between immobilization or being a puppet pulled by someone else's strings to high proactivity, the power to act according to your own values instead of being acted upon by other people and circumstances. The location of these four factors on the continuum, the resulting degree of their integration, harmony, and balance, and their positive impact on your life are a function of your center, the basic paradigms at your very core. Let's look at the next slide.
This is another thing interesting. None are all or nothing.
Yeah.
This is exactly is power.
You don't have no power or all power. You're somewhere in between.
Mm,
It's a spectrum. All of them are a spectrum. You don't have no worth or complete worth. And even if someone that has complete worth is delusional, like a narcissist, they believe that they're the most important thing, but they're really not,
mhm.
right? And if someone who has no worth is someone who's depressed, their self-esteem, they may hate themselves. They don't value themselves. And that's a mental illness again, right?
This is one a good example. Universe was created for nothing.
Sure.
And for nothing, we created one explosion, and we have all we have now around us.
It's true. It's a very
It's
interesting,
phenomenal.
our existence is like, okay, or existence in general is super interesting, which is the reason why we ought to continue to ask questions and learn more about why we're here, what we are, what is the cosmos.
But the other argument I've heard is, you know, we say this is fascinating. Oh, this is fascinating, you know. But you know, it's like a like the reason you are here is because, you know, the fact you are already here. That's why you can ask these questions, right?
Mhm.
So so it's not like how do you say it's now this thing doesn't exist in Mars, right? The Mars doesn't have the suitable condition for human being, right?
Sure.
Or the
At the
moon,
moment, yeah.
the moment. So I guess the question is, you think it's a fascinating, but you can ask this question is because of this fascinating thing
Sure.
exists.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like it's not like I don't know that you're already taking something granted for granted. I don't know how do I describe that.
But not everything exists, has the capacity to ask those questions anyways. Like the dog can't do that.
Right.
You know, the dog just kind of is and has some self-awareness and feels some things. We're on the very end of the spectrum, and all of the other, you know, humanoids before us kind of are all extinct. They all died. The closest relative we have is the chimpanzee, right?
Right.
And so,
I guess the question is, you know, on one hand, we are so amazed by, oh, this thing's so great, and you know, the ocean, whatever, you know, is so fascinating.
Mhm.
But the person who are asking, who are curious about these fascinating things, is already, he or she is also part of the fascinating. So,
Yeah.
so it's kind of like, you know, because you are not outside of this fascination, because you're already in
it's true. It's
So
true.
so how can you ask the independent?
This is a Kantian thing, right? Alternative centers. So now what's going to happen is he's going to give different examples of different centers that people's 4 life support factors are generated from. Okay.
Mhm.
And so all encompassing effects of our center are in every aspect of our lives. So whatever you have as your center, and you may not chosen that, like as we grow up, we develop beliefs about the world and about ourselves and other people, and we may not even be aware that we're believing those things. That's just a function of how intelligence develops and our prefrontal cortex and stuff. And so learning critical thinking is to go through your beliefs and evaluate them and then decide, is this a sound belief? And so the same thing with our centers. We may have been socialized in a specific cultural or social context that this is a certain way of being, right? Like people that live in highly propaganda Russia right now. That's hard,
Mhm.
right? Because you can't even have a conversation like this. We would all be thrown in jail. Be very bad, right? And so certain social contexts will promote more or less autonomy of individuals.
Mhm.
So he is identifying in his experience, these are some of the most centered orientations people have.
Uh-huh.
And he wants to go through and show us how each one of them will affect those 4 factors, right?
Mhm.
So there's spouse centeredness. He says there's emotional dependence there, family, money, work, possession, pleasure, friend, enemy, another emotional dependence, church, self-centeredness. And he says sometimes in learning about our centers, like learning about beliefs and critical thinking, it may be easier to recognize that in another person first and then learn to see it in yourself. So he's saying that might be a first step for people in their paradigm shifting, right? So let's go to the book. So page 125. Each of us has a center. Usually don't recognize it as such. Neither do we recognize the all-encompassing effects of that center on every aspect of our lives. Let's start by examining several centers or core paradigms people typically have for a better understanding of how they affect these four fundamental dimensions and the sum of life that flows from them. So the first one, spouse-centeredness. Marriage, very intimate, usually very satisfying, hopefully. It's enduring, growth-producing human relationship. It can seem natural to center yourself around your partner, your husband or your wife.
Mhm.
The experience and observation of Stephen Covey shows him something different. When he's working with people that are troubled in their marriages, he observes a specific thread weaving through these spouse-centered relationships. There's a strong emotional dependence.
Mhm.
If our sense of emotional worth, which is security, that's the factor, comes primarily from our marriage, then we become highly dependent on that relationship. We become vulnerable to the moods and feelings, behavior, and treatment of our spouse. Any external event that may impinge on the relationship, like a child, in-law, economic setbacks, social success, can affect it. When responsibilities increase and stresses come, page 126, come in the marriage, we tend to revert to the scripts we were given as we were growing up. And also the spouse does as well. Those scripts are usually different between the two people. Different ways of handling financial, child discipline, in-law issues come to the surface. When these deep-seated tendencies combine with the emotional dependency in the marriage, the spouse-centered relationship reveals all its vulnerability.
Question.
Yeah.
What does it like mean? Spouse-centered, spouse-centeredness. What does it really mean?
So what all-centeredness, so we go back to this diagram. All-centeredness is where your guidance comes from, your security, your wisdom, and your power.
Mhm.
But really, it needs to come from something beyond that. Because if there's a problem with your spouse, then your self-esteem will be reduced.
But I kind of I mean in general maybe it's okay. But using critical thinking,
Yeah.
we before we talk about spouse-centeredness, we have to exactly know what does it mean. Does it mean that what does it mean? Does it mean I'm centered around my spouse? Or what does it mean? Is it my spouse want me to sleep at 9 o'clock? I sleep at that 9 o'clock. If I follow all her guidance, what does spouse-centered mean?
Okay, so let's look. So what he says is that the center is where these four properties come from, right? So page 124, whatever is at the center of our life will be the source of our security, guidance, wisdom, and power. That's where our security comes from. So if you're spouse-centered, your sense of worth comes from your relation with your spouse. Your identity is formed from your spouse. Your emotional anchorage is from your spouse. Your self-esteem is from your spouse. And your personal strength or lack of it is from your spouse. In the context of guidance, your direction in life comes from your spouse, right? Your internal frame of reference that interprets what's happening out there comes from your spouse. Your standards or principles or implicit criteria that govern moment-to-moment decision-making and doing comes from your spouse. So the person would say, what would my partner want me to do? And then they do that. Instead of making a decision based on principles that are in tune with who they are.
And it's interesting when you have dependencies, when you depend on whatever, one person, your spouse, families, God, are you vulnerable? If you don't cut these dependencies and you are totally free. So it's just, how could be, all is this created, pleasure. Okay, I need pleasure. I go to all these kind of dependencies on whatever.
Yeah, well, you want to be
vulnerable.
So you want to be dependent on yourself, and notice that self-centeredness is something that he has as a property, but it's not my view of myself or ego in a narcissistic way. And he says, what is the most core part of who you are? He says that your paradigms are, and having paradigms based on principles in reality, like being proactive, will necessarily make you more effective in life. That is a better sense of centeredness than just somebody else's opinion right? Like, for example, if your spouse is an alcoholic,
Oh,
right, or they're depressed, like there's an example in David Burns's book where there's these two twins, and one brother is super depressed and is failing at school. So the twin brother fails at school, so his other brother won't feel depressed anymore. And he says, David Burns says, no, that's not what you're supposed to do, right? That's the distortion of personalization. What you need to do is be a role model for your brother in your success, and then take some time to listen to the person and be compassionate and empathetic and try to be there for them. But don't let the failings of somebody else be the failings of you.
Empathy.
Yeah, empathy is a different property, but use empathy in helping them,
Hmm.
right? But don't let somebody else's, like if David starts shooting heroin and becomes addicted, me joining him and shooting heroin isn't going to help him become less addicted. It will actually reinforce the addiction, and it'll also affect me, right?
But why, using that example, yeah, this is right. But why the guy wants to, also get himself depressed so he can, that must be a reason that he wants, I know it's not productive.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Like, the case you just say, you want to just, you must value the friendship. You must, he
Right.
likes the principle based.
Yeah.
So maybe the guy who wants to go depressed with the guy also is based on value. But the value the principle he hold on is I gotta be with my brother.
Yes, okay, good. That's true.
Mhm.
But it's the paradigm, the principle is incorrect. That's what he says about like the wisdom part, right? Wisdom is your perspective on life, your balance, integrated wholeness, right? How things relate to each other, right? And then his guidance, the decision to do that on the wrong principle would be incorrect. So it's better to demonstrate healthy lifestyle habits
Mhm.
and means of dealing with stress, like let's say social anxiety, right? Like what is actually the problem with the brother, the initial brother that's failing? The brother that joins in the failing isn't helping the failing. Failing together isn't making it better,
So
right?
So I get I get it. So maybe the problem is not about maybe surface is what this spouse centeredness whatever, because people don't just do spouse centeredness for nothing. Maybe the guy who do the spouse centeredness, maybe he feel lonely.
Sure.
Maybe he think that I cannot live without my spouse. That's the deeper psychological reason.
Yes.
So maybe it's he follows the wrong principle. The wrong principle is I cannot live without depending on other people. So maybe he should correct that principle rather than just say spouse sentiments.
Exactly.
Because everything has a reason for that. That's just the surface.
So let's go back. The territory is loneliness.
Yeah.
Right. We all can feel loneliness, and David Burns would say loneliness is a product of low self-esteem. Okay. So if we have loneliness as something that can happen as a human being, what is our paradigm to deal with loneliness? Well, how do I navigate that reality? So some people may say dependency and attachment to others. That's the way that that could be a script. It's the current paradigm they have, but it may be incorrect, right? And so the principle of let us look to the nature of loneliness, the science behind loneliness, and the nature of self-esteem, that as a principle is based on the reality of the human condition. And that's what I am trying to do as a specific example, but in general for the philosophy of society, right? Let us do that all the time.
Yeah.
And so dispensing of negative paradigms, the letting go of other belief systems, right, is part of what we might need to do together as a group, because it's hard. If you believe in something that may not be true, like I've had beliefs, like I used to believe in like chi energy growing up, and I used to meditate, like
Chi.
yeah. But then when I went to university, I studied and I was like, you know what? To say that chi is its own energy force, there's only 4 fundamental forces in the universe. So which one would it be? It's not gravity. It's not really electromagnetism, because I can't use chi energy to turn the lights on and off. That doesn't make sense. I can't move objects. That doesn't make sense. Right? It's not the strong and weak nuclear force. That doesn't make sense. But it really is just kinetic energy. You're just sensing the heat in your hands, and your blood flow is increasing through your breathing techniques, right?
This is right. The most dependent you are, the most vulnerable you are. For example, I depend on drugs. I depend on my people are dependent because they lose the job. It's
Sure.
nothing. They can find another one, but no, it's depending on money. I have to pay my bills. I have to totally. But for example, Stoicism, they think accept the reality.
Yes.
If I accept the reality and I have any of this, it doesn't matter because it's a reality. And the sun is every day the same. So it's
Sure.
good when you accept reality and you don't, it's not exactly depending on something, anything, you'll be happy.
I like what you say. You know, the story, especially the stories of, you know, because I also, but also you know, my experience is that yes, we should do what the story told us. Like, for example, stories say, you know, your dignity is not related to your possession. But philosopher Martha Nussbaum,
Okay.
she said that's a very naive thinking. You look at our society, you don't have money, you know, where's your dignity? You know, I mean, yes, you know, I could live on the street, you know, I could still have my home dignity, but in reality, it's a too much a requirement. You know,
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? You know, so story is great, but also how do we live out of those, how do we live our life real, you know, like what they say, you know, leave out the principles.
Sure. Okay, let's continue. There's a lot to say there, but we're just going to keep on rolling with it. Okay, so spouse centeredness. So 126. So when we are dependent on the person whom with we are in conflict, both need and conflict are compounded. Love and hate overreactions, fight or flight, withdrawal, aggressiveness, bitterness, resentment, competition. When this occurs, we tend to fall even further back on our background tendencies and habits. In an effort to justify and defend our own behavior, we all can also attack our spouse. Anytime we're too vulnerable, so we understand the notion of the centeredness and how it affects these 4 factors, right? When we're too vulnerable, we feel the need to protect ourselves from further wounds. So we resort to sarcasm. You know, that's one example. Each partner can wait for the other to give love, but they can be disappointed because it's not happening. There's a phantom security in a relationship. Guidance is based on the emotion of the moment. Wisdom and power are lost in counter-dependent negative interactions. So that's spouse centeredness. Okay, so next is family centeredness. So it can seem natural and proper, an area to focus and deep investment, provide the greatest opportunities for deep relationships, for loving and sharing, for much that makes life worthwhile. As a center, it ironically destroys the very elements necessary for family success. People who are family-centered get their sense of security or personal worth from the family tradition and culture or the family reputation. They become vulnerable to any changes that tradition or culture and to any influences that would affect their reputation. Family-centered parents do not have the emotional freedom, the power to raise their children with their ultimate welfare truly in mind. If they derive their own security from the family, their need to be popular with their children may override the importance of a long-term investment in their children's growth and development. Page 127. Focus on the proper and correct behavior of the moment. Any behavior they consider improper threatens their security. They become upset, guided by the emotions of the moment, spontaneously reacting to the immediate concern rather than the long-term growth and development of the child. They can yell and scream, they overreact or punish out of bad temper. Because their ideal view of family is not meeting their expectations, and that contrast can produce some dissonance, and they can become upset, right? That's the security part. They become insecure because the reality is not what they want it to be. And then their perspective would be through the lens of it. Their values and their goals would be through the lens of what the family says. And so there's not really a sense of independence when we make the family the source of these 4 properties, right? If the family's upset, you'll lose power, right? Or if the family isn't motivated, you can lose motivation to do what's right. They may overreact and punish out of bad temper, tend to love for their children conditionally, making them emotionally dependent or counter-dependent and rebellious. Money.
Good. So let me ask you. So I saw some phenomenon that like the parents, especially the mom, they sacrifice their life for the kids.
Yeah.
Basically, I heard the argument. Okay, since I already give birth to my kids, you know, I have to grow them. I have to. It's just like I have no choice. I anything else because I have to. I mean, you guys have kids, you know. Maybe you can share. You know, like is that a family centeredness? Like no.
No, and I think it's just natural to instinct.
Yes,
Yeah, yeah. So natural instincts. Yeah. So I have to sacrifice. So this is not the family centeredness.
So again, centeredness is when like our direction in life, like what's important or where we're going is determined by the consensus or the democracy of the family and not what is based on what's right. Right? So for example, if someone in a family has substance abuse problems, they may shun and ostracize that person because that's what everyone feels like doing, but it's not actually what's best for that person's recovery. I experienced that in my family, right? There was a person that was a heroin addict, and the family didn't know what to do because they're not psychologists, they're not addiction workers, they don't understand, right? So the family, just as most social groups, will be prone to all the problems of social groups. And if you're working with children, you're going to get the vote of children. They don't know what's going on. They're depending on you to have a mind to say this is actually the right way of doing things.
So if as what has been called, he promotes as a principle based, what would be that like? You know, if we encounter a similar situation, like in a family, there's a like what you just described. If a principle valued people as the author promotes.
There's a quote he has, or that was written in the back, and
I'm kind of wondering what Stephen Covey really looks like in his real life, in his own life.
oh yeah, well there's some stuff in here about that. You know what I mean? About how.
What did he do? He's just write a book.
He did consulting for organizations, and basically he developed this book out of doing that, and then just taught this stuff to organizations and people and whatnot. The main one of the good quotes, I don't want to spend time looking for it, but is base your decision or what you're going to do, your actions, on the laws that govern the results you seek. He says on the first page of the foreword, if you want to achieve your highest aspirations and overcome your greatest challenges, identify and apply the principle or natural law. So he's almost equating principles with natural laws that governs the results you seek. How we apply a principle will vary greatly and be determined by our unique strengths, talents, and some creativity, blah, blah, blah. But it's always derived from acting in harmony with the principles to which success is tied. Right? So that's where I said that if people have a certain belief that's just incorrect, if you make whatever they want and making them happy the center of how you develop your self-esteem, what's important, your perspective on things, and your motivation, all of those properties will be limited by those people, or by seeking pleasure, or by generating money. And those are all the different centers.
I get that. But you know, I'm just thinking this book is written like maybe 40 years ago.
Yeah.
So people these days, they have different concept or different belief about natural law. What is natural law for them?
Well, we can redescribe things with different terminology or use YouTube or Instagram, but the cosmos hasn't changed that much. It's just our technology has changed, right? And we're more globalized, but we're still like have an olfactory bulb. We still see with rods and cones. We still have an amygdala. You know, like our evolution is actually geared towards living in trees more so than it is to sitting in this chair. And if you sit in this chair, like if you spend time swinging in a tree without falling, obviously, you're going to be in better shape than if you spent the equivalent amount of time sitting in an office.
Evolution.
Right? Because that's where we evolved. Our bodies are geared toward, like physiologically geared towards a specific kind of environment. Way more so than the last 20 years or 40 years of our social and technological developments. Like development is different than evolution. Evolution is that some species survived and reproduced, and so their genes changed because they had more offspring, whereas development is like change and adaptability over time. Right?
Okay.
There's a difference between the two. People use the word evolution incorrectly often. All right, let's jump back in the boat here. So we are on money centeredness, page 127. So again, if we take money as the sense of our self-esteem, if you lose money, you'll be upset. You're going to become
I
depressed.
will be upset.
If you're money-centeredness, right? You can have a sense of loss, but your self-esteem is different, right? So someone that like loses all of their financial, if they tie their identity and who they are to the stock market and all of their money is there, right? And then they lose all that money. That's why some people will commit suicide because of losing their fortune, because their identity was tied to
That's
that,
true. Uh-huh.
right? If your power is tied to how much money you have, you won't have motivation to do things that are good for you, like going for a walk, because you believe that you need money to have happiness. And going for a walk is relatively free, right? Just taking calories.
But how do you just like I just explained, the dignity these days,
Yeah.
I mean, theory, dignity has nothing to do with money. I can sleep on the street, like what's the guy that in front of the Alexander, Diogenes,
Diogenes.
but who can be Diogenes,
A lot of people might be misguided with their paradigms. Like if Nussbaum is looking at a descriptive way of what the world is, many people may be incorrect in their paradigms, using Covey's terminology, right? Is that they're using like a social comparison. Their self-esteem is related to where they are in reference to somebody else, right? So they only have value if they're better than you, or if they have more money than you. Whereas you need a certain amount of money to kind of live well, about $70,000 to $80,000 a year in this country, right? Below that, there's evidence that shows that your happiness and well-being will be depreciated to some degree. But above that, it doesn't really change that much. You don't need that much money.
Yeah. I think it's money is, especially in North America, is somehow a god.
Yeah.
And you are one slave of money.
Mm-hmm.
Because you have to work. You have a one boss. You focus your life in money, and you see poor people in Africa are totally happy.
Yeah,
nothing. So it's why we depend on money.
I want to be like African. Let me ask you. A lot of people complain. There's so many people complain. If I live in Toronto, I need to pay a high rent. You go to get a dinner. It's a $30 or $40. Much higher than before. And then all of a sudden you feel like it's very difficult to raise kids here. Everything inflation, the petroleum, So how do you tell those people the money is not?
I'm from Africa, so just to speak on that a little bit, I think that's a little bit of a misperception. I think people who come here from Africa tend to over-exaggerate how it was back home, and people back home tend to exaggerate how terrible it is here and that they want to move to the United States. I think it's just the nature of people where wherever they are, we tend to amplify the worst parts. We tend to want to complain because I think that's what we focus on. But I assure you 100%, if you go to a lot of parts, especially the poor parts of Africa, people will always say, most definitely say, yeah, I want to go to the United States. And if you go to the United States, they'll be like, I don't want to be in the United States no more.
Yes.
So yeah, I just want to say something about that.
Okay, let's continue. So money-centeredness, 127. Thanks, Daji. Another logical and extremely common center for people's lives is making money. Economic security is basic to one's opportunity to do much in any other dimension. A hierarchy or continuum of needs, physical survival and financial security comes first. Other needs are not even activated until that basic need is satisfied. Most of us face economic worries. Many forces in the wider culture can do to act upon our economic situation, causing or threatening such disruption that we often experience concern and worry that may not always arise to the conscious surface. Sometimes there are apparently noble reasons for making money. Desire to take care of one's family, for example. These are important, but to focus on money making as a center will bring about its own undoing. The 4 life support factors, security, guidance, wisdom, and power, derive much security from my employment or from my income or net worth. Many factors affect these economic foundations. I can become anxious and uneasy, protective and defensive about anything that may affect them. So again, they're valuing the mode of material exchange instead of intrinsic things that can bring more happiness. Sense of personal worth comes from my net worth, vulnerable to anything that will affect my net worth. Work and money provide no wisdom, no guidance. So money in itself is not just a value, it's a means to an end, right? Money in itself is not a perspective on the world or how things fit together and make sense. Again, it's just a monetary mode of exchange.
I agree. But let me dig a little bit deeper
sure.
here. So I guess that today is a challenge. Something is not because of people think that money is the most important thing. Is because I'll give you an example. That the reason why we can sit here, not working at the restaurant, that's a reason. Because we have some whatever saving or whatever. That's why we can sit here. Why we can read. Otherwise, we'll do the job maybe we don't like what Karl Marx used the term. What do you call that?
Alienation.
Alienation. So that's a challenge. It's not I want to go stay at home or be with my kids. I don't want to do something I hate. I don't find meaning. So how does Scott? That's the challenge we have, and I wonder what the author will say on those challenges. It's not about money sentiment. It's about, I know money is not center, but I have to make money. To sacrifice my principle.
Well, I don't think you have to make money to sacrifice your principle. You just need to find a way to make money that doesn't sacrifice your principles. It doesn't lower your self-esteem. That's not contrary to your identity, right? That doesn't go out of your values or out of the way that your life is composed.
That's right. But I live in a society, like any philosopher like Ross, would say, whether ideally I could find something that I don't have to sacrifice my principle to make money. But what is the society? What is the capitalism? Whatever you call it, the structure doesn't allow me or doesn't provide the conditions for me to, because I'm just the challenge here.
Yeah. Well, that is an issue with the society, but you are an independent person, especially in this country. You do have a lot of freedom, right? Like example in Russia, you can be thrown in jail, or like the example with Iran, if you don't want to wear your hijab, you're going to be dragged into a car and bad things are going to happen to you, right? And so, or in China, another example, if in this country and in other countries that are like Canada, you're able to exercise your freedom. And that's part of, I think, what it means to just really be an adult, is to navigate yourself to a place where you can make money in a way that you're comfortable with it. That it's not violating your principles. You're not doing something you don't really want to do. Like if I giving foot massages, I'm like, I don't know, man. I'd rather be a gardener. If I had to choose between a minimum wage job and there was one or the other, I'd choose being a gardener, right? I'd have to shovel manure, but I would do it. Massaging feet, I'm like, I don't know. I guess so. I can do it. I've done it for my girlfriends or something like that, but
That's totally different. That's different.
I'm just saying, but like I wouldn't, you do have a choice. You know what I mean? And there is a way. I talked about this before, but like you need to find something in the immediate so you can make income immediately. And then you want to start educating yourself and building some kind of an entrepreneur business. And then also develop the credentials educationally or through experience, you might be volunteering initially, to make money at something that you are really good at that's in an employment context. And so there's 3 different steps, right? And the progress of being a fully mature adult is to get to the latter 2, right?
Right. But, let me ask you, because you're more familiar. Did you notice that like even in Canada, I know it's way better than some other parts of the world. But did you notice that if you major in, for example, philosophy, history, literature, not those engineer, I would say this is more like human sciences.
Okay.
It's not only in Canada but also in US. It's very difficult to find a job that is fits your major. It's a people. Maybe especially as an immigrant, you probably want to find a job that could do metaphysical stuff. It's very, very difficult.
Well, you need to become like a mental health counselor if you're doing that, right? Like there are ways to find a place within the economy, but that goes back to the previous problem of capitalism, and we want to shift towards a post like neo-capitalistic state where it's not just being money centered. But let's continue. Let's ride the horse here. So yeah, sometimes there are apparently no reasons for given for making money, taking care of one's family. So the 4 life support factors: Security and employment come from one's net worth. Many factors affect these economic foundations. You can become anxious and uneasy, protective, defensive. Okay, we talked about that. Work, money per se provide no wisdom, no guidance, a limited degree of power and security. All it takes to show the limitations of this is a crisis in one's life or a loved one. So if someone gets into an accident, right, and they can't work anymore, now what do? Where's your self-esteem now, right? Or if you can't make money. Money-centered people often put aside family and other priorities, assuming everyone will understand that economic demands come first. So an example, a father was going somewhere with his kids, problem a trip to the circus, work called, he declined work. His wife said, well, maybe he should go to work. He said, no, the work will come again, but childhood won't. For the rest of their lives, page 128, the kids remember this little act of priority setting, not only as an object lesson in their minds, but an expression of love in their hearts. Okay, so let's just go through some of these just so we can get some progress with the book here. Work-centeredness. Work-centered people may become workaholics, driving themselves to produce at the sacrifice of health, relationships, or other important areas of life. The fundamental identity comes from their work. They're a doctor, a writer, or an actor. Identity and sense of self-worth are wrapped up in their work. Security is vulnerable to anything that happens to prevent them from continuing work. Guidance is a function of the demands of work. Wisdom and power come from the limited areas of their work, rendering them ineffective in other areas of life. Possession-centeredness. The driving force many people is their possessions, not only tangible material possessions, but also the intangible possessions of fame, glory, and social status. Where through their own experience how flawed such a center is, it can vanish rapidly because influenced by so many other forces. A sense of security lies in their reputation or things they have. Their life will be a constant state of threat and jeopardy if the possessions are lost, stolen, or devalued. So someone has a nice car, the car gets smashed, then they're affected. In the presence of someone of greater net worth, fame, or status, they feel inferior. Presence of someone lesser net worth, they feel superior. Their sense of self-worth constantly fluctuates. They don't have any sense of constancy or anchorage or persistent selfhood. Constantly trying to protect and secure their assets, priorities, securities, position, and reputation. People committing suicide after losing their fortunes. So it's like someone who's always committed to like the newest technology. They don't have the newest thing, which is very expensive. They don't feel worth. Pleasure-centeredness. So we find pleasure. We live in a world of instant gratification. It's available and encouraged. Influences in increasing people's expectations. Social media graphically portrays what other people have and can do. The life of ease and fun, like a YOLO philosophy, you only live once. The glitter of pleasure-centered lifestyles is graphically portrayed. Natural result of such lifestyles, the impact on the inner person, productivity, and relationships are seldom seen. Okay, this is page 129. Innocent pleasures in moderation can provide relaxation for the body and mind. It can foster family and other relationships. Pleasure per se offers no deep, lasting satisfaction or sense of fulfillment. Pleasure-centered person, bored with each succeeding level of fun, constantly cries for more and more. New pleasure is to be bigger and better, more exciting with a bigger high. A pleasure of this state becomes almost it's not narcissistic, it's hedonistic. That's an inaccurate word there. The next one is narcissism. Hedonism is the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain. Interpreting all of life's terms in terms of pleasure is a very self here and now kind of orientation. Too many vacations that last too long, too many movies, TV, video games, undisciplined leisure time, where the person continually takes the course of at least resistance to gradually waste their life. Ensures that a person's capacities are dormant, talents remain undeveloped, mind and spirit become lethargic, the heart is unfulfilled. There's no real meaning in what's going on. They're not progressing towards a meaningful goal. Where's the security, guidance, wisdom, and power? It's at the low end of the continuum, pleasure of the fleeting moment. So there's a quote here. Okay, friend and enemy centeredness. Young people are susceptible to becoming friend-centered. Acceptance and belonging to a peer group can become almost supremely important. Distorted and ever-changing social mirror becomes a source of the 4 life support factors, creating a high degree of dependence on the fluctuating moods, feelings, attitudes, and behaviors of others. Friend-centeredness can also focus exclusively on one person, taking page 130, some of the dimensions of marriage, emotional dependence on one individual, escalating need and conflict spiral, resulting negative interactions can grow out of friend-centeredness. Enemy at the center, people wouldn't think of it. No one would want to do this. Enemy centering is very common. In business, he has an example coming up. Frequent interaction between people who are in real conflict. When someone feels they have been treated unjustly, by an emotionally or socially significant person, it's easy to become preoccupied with that person and the injustice to make the other person the center of their life. Rather than proactively leading their own life, enemy-centered person is counter-dependently reacting to the behavior and attitudes of a perceived enemy. So a friend of his taught at university, was distraught because of the weaknesses of a particular administrator who they had a negative relationship, allowed themselves to think of that person constantly until it became an obsession. They were so preoccupied it affected the quality of their relationships with their family, the church, and at work. Came to the conclusion that they had to leave the university and accept a teaching job somewhere else. So he says, wouldn't you prefer to stay at the university if the man wasn't here? Yes, I would. But as long as he's here, then my staying is too disruptive to everything in life. I have to go. Why have you made this other person the center of your life? He was shocked by the question and denied it, pointing to him that he was allowing one individual and his weaknesses to distort his entire map of life, determining his faith and the quality of his relationships with his loved ones. He finally admitted that this individual had such an impact on him, he denied that himself had made all these choices. He attributed the responsibility for the unhappy situation to the administrator himself. He declared was not responsible. As we talked little by little, he became to realize that he was indeed responsible. Because he did not handle this responsibility well, he was being irresponsible.
A question?
Yeah.
So I was wondering, I'm trying to kind of get a better understanding. So this sentiment, this theory, remember Maslow has a hierarchy.
Yeah.
And then in one of the hierarchy, it's called belongings. So this is talk about don't do the friend sentence. What about the person who but belonging is also among the hierarchies, right? It's a fundamental needs,
Yeah.
And then the top is self-achievement, right?
So the principle would be have healthy relationships with people that want the best for you and want you to grow and that you have a pleasant experience with, right? That's a principle that you can follow. But if your personal values or if you're uncomfortable come up within those relationships, you have the ability to exit and have boundaries with those people.
A boundary.
Yeah. So the relationship itself is not the most important thing. The relationship is a need that you have as a human being. And as long as the relationship is healthy, you'll participate in the relationship.
Okay. So friend sentence means that we have an unhealthy friendship, right? Something like
Well, that your duty to the group or to the friend will override your duty to yourself or to the situation. So for example, if like the friend is being racist and like throws a rock at somebody because of their ethnicity and you know it's wrong, right? But then you're like, well, I don't want my friend to not like me, so I'm going to participate in the racism, right? Like group bullying would be another example.
Mm.
If they know that the bully is wrong in the classroom, then they don't tell the bully they're wrong because they don't want the bully to not be their friend. And so they just go along with the bullying, right? So it violates certain ethical principles or principles of just being decent to other people. Like
So again violating the principle centered.
There is some principle, like ethical principle or natural law of human, like the human condition that it would go against. And that's not really good. It's not there's a better way, right? Than just arbitrarily making the other person always the center of your wisdom, guidance, security, and power, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
All right, let's continue.
Yeah.
The horse continues. So 131. Divorced people fall into a similar pattern. They're still consumed with anger and bitterness and self-justification regarding their ex-spouse. In a negative sense, psychologically, they are still married. Each need the weakness of the former partner to justify their accusations. Older children can go through life secretly or openly hating their parents. They blame them for past abuses, neglect, or favoritism, and they center their adult life on that hatred, living out the reactive justifying script that accompanies it. Individual who is friend or enemy centered has no intrinsic security. Their self-esteem is related through negation to the other person, not on their own. Feelings of self-worth are volatile, a function of the emotional state, behavior of other people. Guidance comes from the person's perception of how others will respond. Wisdom is limited by the social lens or by an enemy-centered paranoia. Individual has no power. Other people are pulling the strings. So religious centeredness. He says church, but that's because he's Christian. Just religious centeredness is really what's going on here. Almost anyone who is seriously involved in any church will recognize, or religion, that religious practice is not synonymous with spirituality. Some people will get so busy in religious worship and projects that they become insensitive to the pressing human needs that surround them. contradicting the very precepts that profess to believe deeply. So for example, there's something called moral licensing. So people will do really moral, ethical things, and they feel that gives them the license to act immorally. So someone will go to church or some spiritual thing, but then they'll go home and be bad at home to their kids or their partner or to people in general, right?
Because they thought they already did that part.
That there's like some value, like I gained moral credit and now I can spend it. It's called moral licensing.
Oh.
So anyways, others who attend religious practice less frequency or not at all, but whose attitudes and behaviors reflect a more genuine centering of the principles of some basic religious ethic. Attending a religious practice does not necessarily mean living by the principles taught in those meetings. You can be active in religious practice, but inactive in what its teachings are. Religious practice-centered life or religious-centered life, image or appearance can become a person's dominant consideration, leading to being a hypocrite that undermines personal security and intrinsic worth. Guidance comes from social conscience. A religious-centered person tends to label others as artificially in terms of active, inactive, liberal, orthodox, or conservative. So people will be like, did you go to church this week? And if you didn't, you're like less worthy of a person.
No, Pentecost.
Religiosity is a formal organization made up of policies, programs, practices, and people. Cannot itself give a person any deep, permanent security or sense of intrinsic worth. Living the principles taught by some religious group can do this, but the organization alone cannot. Page 132. Nor can the religious group give a person constant sense of guidance. Religious-centered people often tend to live in compartments, acting and thinking and feeling in certain ways on religious holidays, totally different on other days of the week. Lack of wholeness or unity or integrity is a further threat to their security, creating the need for increased labeling and self-justifying. Saying, yeah, but I'm super religious, so it's like, I'm a really good person, but it's in contrast to how they actually are. Seeing the religious group as an end rather than as means to an end undermines the person's wisdom and sense of balance. The religious group claims to teach people about the source of their power, does not claim to be the power itself, claims to be the vehicle through which one divine, godly power can be channeled into the person's nature. Okay, last one, self-centeredness. We're making progress here. This is narcissism. Most common center today is the self. The most obvious form is selfishness. Violates so not being pro-social as well, violates the values that most people. If we look closely at many of the popular approaches to growth and self-fulfillment, we often find self-centering at their core. There's little security, self-esteem in being narcissistic. It's the contrast, or being asocial a little bit, you could say it's within this self-other relation, or antisocial. Their guidance, like what's important, what's valuable, wisdom, how things are coherent in our perspective, or power, our motivations to do things, lie at the center of the self. So again, when we say self here, we have to disambiguify what he means. The principal parts are your most core elements of yourself. So it is actually a self-centered approach, but it's what he means by that is principles that are based on reality or coherent philosophies.
So what's the difference from that with this?
This would be like ego. Like, I'm so great. I'll do whatever I want to do, and I don't care about anybody else. Or I hate all people. That's kind of enemy-centeredness, but
Selfish?
being selfish is one. That's like that. When he says that, I would say that's like not being pro-social, and which is antisocial.
Antisocial?
Yeah, it's like being a sociopath, like the Joker from Batman.
What about those people who are a little bit introvert?
Yeah, introvert's different, right? That just means that you get anxiety being around other people. You feel more comfortable being alone, which is fine. As long as you have people there for you when you need them, then it's okay, right? Paying attention to the development of self in the greater perspective and improving one's ability to serve, produce, and to contribute in meaningful ways gives context for dramatic increase in the 4 life support factors. Okay, so some of the more common centers from which people approach life. Often much easier to recognize the center in someone else's life than to see it in your own. Probably know someone who has put money making ahead of everything else, or someone who's devoted to justifying their position in a negative relationship. Sometimes you can see beyond their behavior into the center that creates it. Okay, so identifying your center. Next slide. So closely examine your life support factors on the slide here. Depending on internal, external conditions, one center may be activated until underlying needs are satisfied. Okay, so he has a chart here. page 133 to 135. Let's see if we can get through this chart. And so in your book, is it in right there in that spot?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
It's an appendix in one of the other books. Okay, so he says the center. So he goes through each one of them specifically here.
Mhm.
So if you're spouse-centered, your security is based on the way your spouse treats you. You're highly vulnerable to the moods and feelings of your spouse. There's a deep disappointment resulting with withdrawal and conflict when your spouse disagrees or does not meet your expectations. Anything that may impinge on the relationship is perceived as a threat. Guidance for spouse-centeredness. Your direction comes from your own needs and wants and from those of your spouse. Your decision-making criteria is limited to what you think is best for your marriage or your mate or the preferences and opinions of your spouse. Wisdom for spouse-centeredness. Your life perspective surrounds the things that may positively or negatively affect your spouse in the relationship. Your power. Your motivations are limited or by the weaknesses of your spouse or the strengths of your spouse and yourself. If you're family-centered, your security is founded on family acceptance and fulfilling family expectations. Your sense of personal security is volatile as the family. Your self-worth is based on the family reputation. Guidance. Family scripting is your source of correct attitudes and behaviors. Decision-making criteria is what is good for the family and what the family members want. Wisdom. So for example, if the family wants to go on a trip but you can't afford it, you do it even though you can't afford it. Interpretation of your life in terms of your family for wisdom. Creating a partial understanding and family narcissism. We're so good, we're so great, we're the best. Instead of being humble, right? Your power from family-centered. Your actions are limited by family models and traditions. Money-centered. Your security, your personal worth is determined by your net worth, which David Burns would highly disagree with, right?
Mhm.
You're vulnerable to anything that threatens your economic security. Your guidance for money-centered. Your profit is your decision-making criteria. Your wisdom for money-centered. Money-making is the lens through which life is seen and understood, creating an imbalanced judgment. The only thing that matters is money. Everything is monetary, and it's not.
Mhm.
Power, money-centered. You're restricted to what you can accomplish with your money and your limited vision. If you're work-centered, your security, you tend to define yourself by your occupational role. You're only comfortable when you're working. You make your decisions, guidance for work-centered. You make your decisions based on the needs and expectations of your work. Wisdom for work-centered, you tend to be limited to your work role. You see your work as your life. Power for work-centered, your actions are limited by work role models, occupational opportunities, organizational constraints, your boss's perceptions, and your possible inability at some point in your life to do that particular work. If you're possession-centered, your security is based on your reputation, social status, or tangible things you possess. You compare what you have to what others have. You make your decisions for guidance for possessions. You make your decisions based on what people will protect, increase, or better display your possessions. Your wisdom for possessions. You see the world in terms of comparative economic and social relationships. For power possession, your function will be the limits of what you can buy or the social prestige you can achieve. Security, if you're pleasure-centered, you feel secure when you're only on a pleasure high, which could be drugs or going on vacations or whatever. Your self-esteem or security is short-lived, anesthetizing.
What does that mean?
Anesthetizing. I'm not saying it correctly. Or you haven't.
What does that mean? Anesthesize.
It's like you're not fully conscious.
Oh,
It's an
okay.
anesthetic. It makes you unconscious in some ways
Oh, okay.
or not aware.
Okay.
You apply an anesthetic, I'll just say it this way, through pleasure to not be aware of your self-esteem, and you're dependent on your environment. Your guidance from pleasure-centered. You make your decisions based on what you will give you the most pleasure. Your wisdom, you see the world in terms of what's in it for you or what feels good.
But what about a guy who say, I just want to enjoy the moment.
Yeah.
I would take those, what you say, the drug, whatever, I just enjoy this moment, I don't care. I don't care if tomorrow I will die, that's fine.
Have a principle for the present moment, but also have other principles, and then find a way to connect all these principles together such that the present moment isn't the only thing that matters to you. Because being hedonistic will lead to negative outcomes. You won't go to the dentist, for example, even though it's uncomfortable, or you won't put up with an uncomfortable conversation, even though it's the right thing to do. Sometimes we have to do what's uncomfortable because it's the right thing to do. And that makes us a stronger person. That behavior is in line with a value that
Mhm.
contradicts just feeling pleasure at all times.
What about there's a happy machine.
Mhm.
I think Nozick talk about that.
Okay.
What about if there's a happy machine?
Mhm.
You just get happy. You don't have to endure all this painfulness. Would that be desirable?
I think that some degree of pain and suffering is necessary for the human condition. It's part of how we learn, and it's one of the elements of what it means to be human. It's just whether or not it's meaningful and you can learn from it. And it's not just a cycle of suffering. It's in line with the condition of growth,
So we need some pain,
growing pains,
growing pains.
right? Like you're not just going to stay in a kid's body your whole life and never grow because like your legs hurt and you have growing pains, right? Doesn't make sense.
But how do you define happiness? For example, in the Plato mythos, you live in a cavern and you are happy because you don't know what is outside.
Oh yeah, the caves.
Mm-hmm.
It's relative. Happiness is not absolute. So as Plato said.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are happy inside, and if you told me that outside is a sun, is colorful, whatever, I will kill you.
Yeah.
Don't disturb me.
Exactly.
Don't touch my happiness.
Exactly.
A lot of people are like that, and I think that there is an instinct for conscious growth, right? That is pro-social, and we want to live in harmony with our environment and ourselves.
For example,
Some humans are more sadistic because they evolved that way, and
Mhm.
they just killed each other to survive, but it's not sustainable, right? The reason that we're here is not because of win-lose
Mhm.
encounters, it's because of win-win encounters. There's a book called Non-Zero by Robert Wright. Okay, let's continue.
When.
Yeah.
One more question. One more
Yeah.
question. So you talk about on that subject, the happiness.
Mhm.
I'll give you an example. There's something called PTSD.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm not sure it's specific. So let's say there's a woman who get beaten or violence.
Okay.
Family violence. But she choose to stay, not get divorced. She still choose to
Yeah.
stay because that's what she's familiar with.
Yes.
Like maybe she already get abused at when she was very young. So she feels happy. She feels like, oh, I want to stay here because I feel happy, even though from the other people, like you learn psychology, critical thinking, that's bad. But if she wants to stay there, what should we tell her? Should we tell her you should leave? But will she feel like, oh, it's good, it's okay,
Yeah, like again, I don't think that happiness is the correct word, and she is a little confused.
Mhm.
If you're in an abusive relationship like that, like society may take away your right of
Society.
autonomy and say no,
Mhm.
right? You're not allowed to be in that context. Other situations, other cultures, they may say that's tolerable and we're going to accept that. But again, that's contrary to the human condition, and you can measure it. You can just look at her prefrontal cortex. Her prefrontal cortex not functioning, her limbic system and her fight and flight mechanisms being engaged because she's under threat. And so her brain is like, she's not able to learn. She has lots of cortisol. Like the human is not supposed to be in that kind of environment, right? And we can see that neurologically. And so even though her subjective report is based on like a battered women's syndrome condition, right? Or like people that are like captive and they fall in love with their captor, like they're like kidnapped or whatever. You know what I mean?
But so what if is this against her own will because she's an adult, and how do we draw the line? Like, oh, according to this neurotic, whatever, oh, you are not functioning well, but she said,
Autonomy is 3 properties. So autonomy
mhm.
is your knowledge, your competency, and the freedom to choose otherwise. So clearly her freedom is not there. And that's some of my criticisms towards certain Islamic situations with women, is they don't have the freedom, right? And we can see that in certain examples. There are other moral issues, but I'm citing that one right now. Okay, let's continue. So pleasure-centered power, your power is almost negligible because it's consumed by how you feel in the moment. If you're friend-centered, your security is a function of the social mirror. You're highly dependent on the opinions of others.
Mhm.
Your guidance, your decision-making criteria is what will other people think. You're easily embarrassed. Your wisdom for being friend-centered, you see the world through the social lens or the viewpoints of other people. Your power, you're limited by your social comfort zone, and your actions are fickle relative to other people's opinions. If you're enemy-centered, your security is volatile. You're based on the movements of your enemy. You're always wondering what they're up to. You seek self-justification and validation from like-minded people. Your guidance, if you're enemy-centered, you're counter-dependently guided by your enemy's actions. You will make decisions based on what will thwart your enemy. Enemy-centered wisdom, your judgment is narrow and distorted. You are defensive, overreactive, and paranoid. Your power for enemy-centered, there's little power that comes from, the little power you get from anger, envy, resentment, and vengeance, the negative energy that shrivels and destroys, leaving little energy for everything else. So all your power is consumed by those. If you're religious-centered, your security is based on religious activity and on the esteem by those in that authority position of the religious group. Your identity and security are related to religious labels and comparisons. If you're religious-centered, your guidance is how others will evaluate your actions in the context of the religious dogma and expectations. If you're religious-centered, you see the world in terms of being a believer and non-believer, belongers and non-belongers. So in-group, out-group bias.
On the enemy centered,
Yeah.
I just sorry, I asked a question just to
Okay.
understand, because I want to relate to the. I know country is not like a person, but you know, country also have the personality. Isn't that at least in this today's world, the superpowers, at least they are very enemy centered.
You can see it in the way that their discourse is. Like Putin will always say the West and demonize the West as a general category, whereas I'd like to think that often, like Anthony Blinken or other members of the United States, they will look at specific actions and they'll make efforts to not demonize the entire country. But in some instances, they still do. And I think it's important to look at our language there and make sure we have our language accurate. Like every time you'd say something like Russia has done this, you would want to, I think it's important to distinguish Russia from the Kremlin, the Putin's Kremlin, right? So you don't do that. You don't have an in-group, out-group bias. And then support the Russian people's autonomy. It's not good for the Russian people that Putin's Kremlin is attacking Ukraine. You'd frame it like that. Or let's just continue because we only have a few minutes left. I want to try to get through this last part here. Religious-centered, your power is perceived through your position within the religious group. If you're narcissistic or self-centered, your security is constantly changing and shifting based on your relation to others and how important you see yourself in certain situations. Your guidance, your judgment is if it's what I want, I need, or what's in it for me. Your wisdom, if you're self-centered, you view the world by how decisions, events, and circumstances will affect you personally, and you don't look at the broader context. We all do that to some degree. Self-interest is important, but like you said, selfishness and then over importance of the self is not good. Your ability to act is limited by your own resources. This is power for the self. Your own resources with the benefits of interdependency. So you're not able to cooperate. Okay, 136. Let's just smash through the last part here. So we went through the chart. If you can identify with one or more of the descriptions in the charts that we just went through, trace it back to the center from which it flows, a center that may be limiting your personal effectiveness. A person's center is some combination of these or other centers. Most people are very much a function of a variety of influences that play upon their lives. Depending on external or internal conditions, one particular center may be activated until the underlying needs are satisfied. Another center becomes the compelling force. So you probably are all over the map. And just like beliefs with critical thinking, we want to go through each one and then reorient or find a principle that center is meeting, replace it with a principle, and then go with that, right? A person fluctuates from one center to another, resulting in relativism like a roller coaster. The moment you're high, the next moment you're low, making efforts to compensate for one weakness by borrowing strength from another weakness. No consistent sense of direction or persistent wisdom or steady power to supply or sense of personal intrinsic worth and identity. The ideal, is to create one clear center from which you constantly derive a high degree of security, guidance, wisdom, and power, empowering you to proactively, I think motivating is a better word here, motivating your proactivity and giving congruency and harmony to every part of your life.
We talk about the self-centeredness.
Yeah.
In psychology, you mentioned that there's a term called narcissistic. Being a narcissistic person, because it's very difficult for him or her to aware that he's self-centeredness. because we'll probably all encounter some people that they always say it's not my fault. They cannot admit their fault. It's always somebody else's fault.
Yeah.
Even he make mistake, and then if you deal with if you be with him, you always feel your boundary get violated.
Okay, one sec. Let's just, I'm gonna, just to touch on this. These are the DSM criteria for narcissism. A grandiose self-assessed self-importance. This is from the clevelandclinic.org. Overestimating their capabilities or holding themselves to unreasonably high standards, bragging or exaggerating their achievements. So you need to have 5 of these, I believe. 5 of 9. Pretty sure it's 5 of 9. Frequent fantasies, number 2, about having or deserving success, power, intelligence, beauty, love, or self-fulfillment. Number 3, belief in superiority, thinking they are special or unique, believing they should associate only with those who they see as worthy. Number 4, need for admiration, fragile self-esteem, frequent self-doubt, self-criticism, or emptiness, preoccupation with knowing what others think of them, fishing for compliments. Number 5, entitlement, inflated sense of self-worth, expecting favorable treatment to an unreasonable degree, anger when people don't cater to or appease them. Number 6, willingness to exploit others, consciously or unconsciously using others, forming relationships with people who boost their self-esteem or status, deliberately taking advantage of others for selfish reasons. Number 7, lack of empathy, saying things that might hurt others, seeing the feelings, needs, or desires of others as a sign of weakness, not returning kindness or interest that others show. Yeah, and that's a bit, but empathy is more like the inability to see things from other people's perspective, an unwillingness to see it from your perspective.
Not curious about others.
Doesn't care at all. And an inability or unwillingness to feel things from their perspective. That's more in line with empathy. Frequent envy, feeling envious of others, especially when others are successful, expecting envy from others, belittling or diminishing the achievements of others. And lastly, arrogance, patronizing behavior, behaving in a way that's snobby or disdainful, taking down or acting condescendingly. And really, it's just the inability to accept that they're wrong. And when you try to demonstrate they've made a mistake, there's a huge repertoire of behaviors that they've developed to avoid that they have done anything incorrect. And you can see Donald Trump do this all the time.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Exactly. So,
Yeah.
so because for them to admitting they're wrong is destroying them.
Yeah.
It's destroying them. So they cannot afford that subconsciously.
Okay, team. So what we're going to do next week is, today was good. Happy about that. We're going to continue on 136 with the Principal Center. And we're going to try to get to, did you get the book yet?
I get an electronic version.
Sure, get both of them. Let's see, 10 pages. Yeah, this chapter goes pretty far. So we're going to try to get to at least, I don't know, we're going to say about 10 pages. We'll see. We'll start on page 136 though. So thank you. I'll see you guys later next week.